Okay, so first off, this is not Bunker Hill, but a lot of people know that.
It's actually Breed's Hill. If you want to find the actual Bunker Hill, swing around to the back corner of the monument.
And what you want to find is the steeple for the church right here. This is the St. Francis de Sales parish. It sits at the high point of the actual Bunker Hill. There's a small historic marker on the side of the church mentioning that the British set up fortifications here after the battle, which touches on the fact that the Americans actually lost the Battle of Bunker Hill. The British take the hill on their final charge, but the real question becomes, what was the price of victory? To paraphrase British General Clinton, a few more victories like that and we'll have lost the war. In fact, Bunker Hill is the most disastrous battle in the war for the British, and up to 1/8 of all officers lost during the entire American Revolution are lost on that day. To rewind a bit, the battles of Lexington and Concord were just 63 days before the Battle of Bunker Hill. British General Gage had organized a raid to seize gunpowder and other weapons in Concord. But the president of the Committee of Correspondence, Joseph Warren, had arranged for messengers to ride out and warn the militias in case of a British raid. The British forces, overwhelmed by opposition, were forced to retreat back to Boston. During the skirmishes that afternoon, British Major Pitcairn, who had led the raids on Concord, had his horse shot out from beneath him and lost a set of matching pistols. American General Israel Putnam would capture and carry these pistols through the remainder of the war. With the British troops now trapped in Boston, Artemus Ward takes control of the U.S. military. His home in Shrewsbury is run as a house museum by Harvard University. In May, British reinforcements begin to arrive, including 3 of the King's best generals: Thomas Howe, John Burgoyne, and Henry Clinton. Both sides quickly realized the importance of taking the high ground surrounding the city: Charlestown to the north and Dorchester Heights to the south. Artemus Ward receives intelligence that the British intend to make a move on Charlestown. He orders William Prescott and Israel Putnam to secure Bunker Hill. William Prescott was born in 1720 in Groton, Massachusetts. This historic marker notes the approximate location of the house he was born in. Prescott then lived in this house in Pepperell, Massachusetts. In 1774, Prescott was made a colonel overseeing local militias. When the news of Lexington and Concord reaches Prescott, he gathers what men he can, and they rush towards Boston to provide reinforcement. Prescott arrives too late, but he and his men enlist, and they join with a small army forming on Cambridge Common. Israel Putnam was born in this house in Danvers in 1718. At that time, Danvers was still a part of Salem Village. Putnam's parents play a role opposing the Salem witch trials. They sign a petition in defense of Rebecca Nurse. Unfortunately, though, Rebecca Nurse would be executed as a witch in 1692. At age 22, Putnam leaves Massachusetts and moves to Connecticut. He makes his home in what is now the Pomfret and Brooklyn area. Putnam becomes locally famous for hunting what is said to be the last wolf in the state. He tracks and kills this wolf at a small cave which can still be found in Pomfret today. There's a plaque outside the cave detailing the story. After hearing about the battles of Lexington and Concord in 1775, he heads to Cambridge to join the small army that is gathering in Cambridge Common. Across from Cambridge Common at Harvard University is a marker showing where 1,200 colonial troops gathered for the march to Bunker Hill on the night of June 16th. You'll find a second marker just behind this one. That marker notes the location of the home that Artemus Ward made his headquarters at. The home, which is no longer standing, would be the birthplace of Oliver Wendell Holmes, who would write about Bunker Hill in a book called The Grandmother's Story. The Grandmother's Story is a first-hand account of the Battle of Bunker Hill as witnessed by a young girl who goes on to be, presumably, Oliver Wendell Holmes' grandmother. It was first published in 1875 on the 100th anniversary of the battle. In any case, in the dead of night on June 16th, colonial troops head out towards Bunker Hill. Despite orders to fortify Bunker Hill, a decision is made to fortify Breed's Hill instead, which is closer to Boston and within view of British ships in the harbor. Richard Gridley of Canton, Massachusetts serves as chief engineer and lays out the defenses on the hill. At dawn the next morning, sentries on the HMS Lively noticed the position and opened fire. After some initial confusion, General Gage orders that all ships in the harbor, as well as batteries on Copp's Hill, open fire on the colonial positions. Frustrating the British is that the American position is out of range of their ships and their cannons on Copp's Hill. It takes about 6 hours for the British to muster troops for a ground assault. As events unfold, Bostonians clamber to the tops of church steeples and high hills to watch the battle across the bay. Down in Quincy, Massachusetts, Abigail Adams and her young son, John Quincy Adams, climb to the top of a nearby hill when they see the smoke and hear the guns across the harbor. There's a small monument in Quincy marking the spot where they stood. And while I wasn't able to spot Bunker Hill, you could still see the Boston skyline from that point. One of the stones worked into the monument is a piece of granite from the Bunker Hill Monument. John Quincy Adams, of course, would grow up to be president, just as his father was before him. At this point, though, as a boy, John Quincy had recently hurt his hand. This wound would be treated by Dr. Joseph Warren. And in fact, Abigail Adams was currently looking after Joseph Warren's children in the relative safety of Quincy. As mentioned before, Joseph Warren was an important leader of the Patriot movement, and it was he that orchestrated the raids of Paul Revere and William Dawes on the eve of Lexington and Concord. Warren had recently been given the rank of general in the Continental Army, but he reported to General Prescott at Bunker Hill and asked to serve in the infantry. British guns had been battering colonial positions all morning, but so far had only succeeded in scoring one casualty. Asa Pollard of Billerica, this is not an actual picture of him, was struck by a stray cannonball and decapitated. General Prescott ordered that his body be buried quickly and quietly as to not disturb the morale of his troops. So the cornerstone on the east side of the monument faces out at the point where the British troops started landing that day. And if you walk over to the Constitution, you'll find a plaque that lines up with that. The British troops began landing in Charlestown around 2 p.m., led by General Howe. For the most part, Charlestown had been abandoned by this point, but there were some that took up positions as snipers to harass the British troops, and the decision was made to burn Charlestown to the ground. This is the Phipps Street burying ground in Charlestown, and here the families are buried in kind of rectangles, and these are the Larkins right here. John Larkin is credited with giving Paul Revere's horse.
This is his brother, Ebenezer. Ebenezer was in Charlestown the night of Bunker Hill, and he was acting as a sniper.
So while you'll find a Larkin house over on Main Street in Charlestown, it was built after the war as the original Larkin house was burnt down. The British launched 2 disastrous charges on the hill, taking heavy casualties. So why was this such a disaster for the British? Well, for one, overconfidence. Henry Clinton didn't think that these unorganized farmers could stand up to the strongest military on the planet. And terrain would have played a part. Today, Charlestown is all streets and sidewalks, but at the time, the hill would have been steeper and the slopes of the hill would have been overgrown with hay. The British uniforms didn't help. They were wearing full wool jackets in the middle of June in Boston, and they each carried a full backpack full of equipment that they did not need. But perhaps most importantly, they were charging uphill at a well-entrenched enemy. The first thing people will notice about the William Prescott statue at the monument is his sword, but take a closer look at his feet and you'll see that the sculptor included a shovel as well. So, why did the Americans lose the battle? Well, for the most part, it comes down to gunpowder. General Howe regroups his troops, he has his soldiers ditch their heavy backpacks, and on their third charge up the hill, the Americans run out of ammunition. The famous phrase of the day, "Don't fire till you see the whites of their eyes," was basically an order not to waste gunpowder. As the British begin to breach their lines, the colonial troops start a retreat back towards Somerville. Joseph Warren, who has been fighting with the infantry, volunteers to stay behind and cover the retreat. His fate is portrayed in this famous portrait by John Trumbull. You'll find this copy of the painting in the American wing at the MFA. And you'll find another copy of the painting up here at the top at the Wadsworth Athenaeum in Hartford, Connecticut. Joseph Warren is buried at the Forest Hill Cemetery in Jamaica Plain. But this is actually the third place he was buried. He was originally buried at Bunker Hill with the troops he was fighting with, but a British soldier returned that evening and dug up his body and desecrated it. In the years prior to the Revolution, Paul Revere had actually done some dental work for Joseph Warren. And in what's thought to be the first instance of forensic pathology, Joseph Warren's remains are identified by that dental work. Now, there's much, much more to be said about Bunker Hill and much more detail that we could go into, but we just wanted to touch on a few of those stories today. The British occupy Boston for another year, but Bunker Hill convinces General Howe that Boston is a lost cause. George Washington arrives in Cambridge and takes command of the army in July. He believes at that time he has 300 barrels of powder, but in fact he only has about 19 after Bunker Hill. We mentioned that Israel Putnam had taken Major Pitcairn's revolvers. Major Pitcairn was a casualty of Bunker Hill, and he is buried beneath the Old North Church, while Putnam himself is buried beneath the statue of him in Pomfret, Connecticut. Artemus Ward is buried in Shrewsbury, not far from his home. His headstone makes up the gate at the south entrance of this cemetery. And William Prescott is buried at a quiet cemetery not far from his home in Pepperell, Massachusetts.